Hello, I'm Tamara Clammer. I'm one of the doers at Brown Paper Tickets, and I've been working there since 2009. That was my first introduction to open source. We use programs with funny names like Thunderbird and Adium and OpenOffice, things that I had never encountered before, not being a tech person myself. The very first time I came to LinuxFest Northwest was in 2011. In rapid succession, a lot of things happened in my life that I would like to tell you a story about today. Afterwards, I'll explain what that has to do with open source. In the meantime, you'll probably be wondering, so I figured I would just mention that ahead of time. So I'll go ahead and get started. I grew up in the cornfields of Illinois in a little town of 300 people with two little brothers. I used to pick on my brothers a lot. My mother said, "Don't pick on your brothers, someday they'll be bigger than you." And it turns out that that was true, but we still pick on each other. And we do it in such a fun way because there's really not a lot of other things to do in the cornfields, especially if you grew up before the internet like we did. My little brother Sean, the one in the blue shirt, is a drummer. He started playing drums when he was 11. Luckily, I was already 16 at the time and I was able to escape. My other brother Scott took apart absolutely everything we owned, including the toaster, and my bicycle, and my dad's lawnmower. But now he can put everything together that you could possibly imagine. He has his own wood shop, his own metal shop, his own blacksmith forge. So growing up with these two characters was a treat. My little brother Sean not only plays drums, but he also refurbishes them. He teaches drum classes. People drop broken drums off on his front porch. He wakes up in the morning and there'll be something stacked up that a person pulled out of a dumpster or found in the basement somewhere. He refurbishes them, makes them beautiful. I say he hoards them, but what he really does is refinishes them and then sells them to his drum students so that they have a nice drum kit to start out with at hardly the cost that a new set would be. My other brother, Scott, loves vintage everything, particularly vehicles and tools. You might think this was a really long time ago because they're 1949 car and camper, but actually this was just last summer in Indiana. They buy really decrepit old trailers for hardly any money at all. They make jokes on Facebook about how they followed them home, but they were of course attached to the trailer hitch, so how could they not? This is their 8th one. They were going to build a carport, a trailer port off of the side of their house, but they have too many now, so instead they bought an entire building to store them in. I have a feeling it's going to be the vintage camper destination of America. It's in Indiana, so keep an eye out for that in the next couple of years, just in case I'm right. I also refurbish things, but I've always had more of a practical take. I found this little desk on the side of the bus stop when I went to work one morning. When I got home from work, it was still there. So I carted it home. I figured it would be good for my son's room. I had the keyboard on there before I realized there's no top. And that's probably why it was free in the first place. Being a resourceful person, I thought, I have an IKEA locker that's about that size. The shelf would probably fit. When I opened that cabinet, I realized I'd already used the shelf for something else, but the bottom was still there. So I stole that, and with all the wrong tools, which I learned how to use really well in the Army, I made some little notches so that the bottom of my IKEA locker would fit on the top of the desk, and it was perfect. I was really happy with myself. And then, over time, I became an artist. When you grow up in a small farm town, art is something that you do in school, and then you grow up and get a job. And when I started working with leather, I was very determined to only make really practical things because I didn't want to have that stigma of not really having a valuable job or whatever. So over time, I became a leather worker, and then I started making masks. But mostly what I did was repurpose furniture. My workbench is made out of a door that was already in the building. The frame of it is scavenged wood from the building. I paid the person who built it $50. The materials were basically free. And even my lamp and my anvil made a perfect combination. So I've always been very much about repurposing things that don't have any particular use anymore. The idea that people had to depend on these gas masks for their life during World War II is just horrifying. If you've ever put one of these GPS Russian gas masks, GP5 they're called, they're terrible. So I made them better. I am probably on a list somewhere because I ordered a case of 35 of them on eBay. And then people started giving me things. Coffee grinder burrs. I had a big stack of them for a while. They make a really terrible mask because it weighs about 9 pounds, but if you tie it to your top hat, it fits great. Luckily, the steampunk people like to do that, but it's very exciting. I love making masks. It's really fun. Mostly I like decorating my art studio, but I'm not allowed to haul home any more unloved furniture. I'm at max capacity. But then this weird thing happened. I became a doer. I started at Brown Paper Tickets and Client Services, answering the phone, helping people with their ticket selling problems. Then I became a doer, which means that I am part of the philanthropic arm of the company. I go out into the world to make it better in a way that is important to me. The way that I chose to do that was through workshops and classes. And a short time later, I was at Maker Faire, Bay Area, in 2011. I'd never heard of Make Magazine. I didn't know what Maker Faire was, but as soon as I got there, it took about 3 minutes to realize I am with my people. It was so amazing, so incredible. It's in May this year, the 21st, that weekend. There are 13,000 makers, and the attendance is just unbelievable. And the reason I bring this up is through Maker Faire, I began to be interested to things that I didn't know anything about before. The primary one that started it all was the Epilogue laser cutter. At Tech Shop Detroit, at the Maker Faire after party, Tech Shop Detroit used to be a Ford showroom, so they have one of those big round turntables on the floor where they used to show the cars. The party had sort of ended up in the middle of that turntable, spinning around. Somebody rolled the keg to the center, and they were having a great time. But I was leaning on the Epilogue laser cutter with Jesse from Autodesk, and he was telling me all of the really great things that this tool can do. Well, I was telling him all the reasons I would never need it for anything, because I do all of my leatherworking by hand. I cut everything by hand. I'm very determined to always be that way. And he said, we'll see. A couple months later, one of my coworkers, her husband has a band called Fictitious, and she wanted to give him a gift for Christmas that would be a journal cover for his songwriting, and she wanted his logo on it. His logo is very intricate. I never bothered to learn proper leatherworking skills, so I had no idea how to do that. But I remembered that Metric CreateSpace in Seattle has a laser cutter. So I apologized to Jesse for all of the argument. I went to Metrics. I had to pay them to create a vector file for me because I didn't even know what those words meant. And it turned out beautiful. Really beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, that the person who received the gift ordered 2 more for the other guys in his band. And something happened to me. All of a sudden I saw that this new technology is exciting. You can do cool things with it. And so the 3D Pocket tour, it was called Pocket Factory, in 2012, started a tour from Seattle across country with their MakerBot Cupcake 3D printers, which were still open source at that time. Since I was just introduced to technology I didn't think I would be interested in, I invited them to come to my industrial arts building that has woodworkers, metalworkers, all the people that do things by hand the old way, so that they could be exposed to this new technology. It was really interesting to watch not only the 3D printers and how fascinated my fellow art building folks were, but afterwards to see the 3D printing guys go down into their studio spaces and watch them, forge steel and, carve wood by hand. It was an interesting exchange of these ideas and ways of doing things. I was working with a drama department at an elementary school making costume pieces. The teacher needed 26 very hungry caterpillar, do you know that story? Caterpillars for these little children that would somehow or another easily transform into butterflies on stage. I had no idea how that was going to happen, but it needed to. So I made a little prototype of a big bug so that they could walk sort of like this and look like a caterpillar. Then I bought the book and found out those caterpillars are actually red at that point, right before they transform. What I did, if you remember the previous slide, those two rivets are actually completely functional. On the other side, one rivet becomes the nose, the other one I glued a little piece of felt to make a mouth, and on the other side is Velcro. I put a little Velcro tab on the back of the caterpillar and the front of the butterfly, and then the children were easily able to just, at that certain point, pull it off, become the butterfly. The show ended. It was wonderful. That was really difficult to come up with. But the next thing that happened is he wanted 26 swans for their Swan Lake production. And 26 swans is a lot of leather. It's a lot of work. So I thought, I will just use the laser cutter. It will make my life easy. I made the prototype by hand, and then learned that engineers and artists do not think the same way. The man that I was dating at the time, the PhD engineer, his idea of how we were going to approach the laser cutter was nothing like the way I thought we would do it. I thought we would cut the leather to fit the bed, 36 by 24, and then just lay out as many as would fit, cut them out, and then do it again and again until we had 26. He told me that there's no way we would have enough leather to do it if we cut the leather in those dimensions. And then he proved me wrong by having me cut out 26 paper chunks, and then he drew circles around them and showed that we would have in fact been about 3.5 swans short. So we ended up cutting out chunks of leather, laser cutting them individually, wasting a lot of time, a lot of leather, a lot of laser time when I could have done all of that by hand. Technology is not always the perfect solution, but it was a really good experience to learn how different mindsets really are. We ended up with our 26 swans. It turned out great. And then I learned something new at Maker Faire again, how to illuminate an LED. And probably, how many of you have done that already in some fashion, lit an LED? It's exciting the first time, right? Like, super exciting. It changed my life in a really bizarre way. As soon as I learned how to do it, we were just using aluminum tape on paper. So it was called Tapetricity. It was one of Chris Connor's projects. And then I showed hundreds more people through the course of Maker Faire how to do it. The most interesting thing to me was to see a woman about my grandmother's age be able to illuminate an LED. The look on her face, I wish I had been able to capture that moment. She grew up in a time when women weren't even allowed to think about touching electronics. That was men's world. For her to be able to do that herself, it was just so magical and so powerful and so inspiring. I was supposed to be doing an event at Maker Faire Seattle just a few months later, and I completely changed it and I did Tapetricity instead. And then it started to find its way in my projects that I was doing with the theater department at the elementary school. They had Where the Wild Things Are, and they wanted some sort of shrunken head things that the kids could dance around with. And so they took balloons and paper mache and cut these big eye openings, and I found someone with bamboo on a free list, so I cut a bunch of bamboo to make the poles. But then I thought, what if we just put some LED throwies in there, just LEDs with the battery taped in and just tucked them into the eyes? That would be really fun. And so I was able to teach a bunch of elementary school kids how to light LEDs as well. Turned out great. And then I got a little bit more advanced. I learned how to use conductive thread. I taught a group of students at the elementary school how to sew conductive thread to make the eyes for their wolf headdresses for Beauty and the Beast be able to light up, so that there was a portion where through the dark audience they were able to chase the beast. It was really exciting. And then I took my prototype swan and added some EL wire for myself, since that was a new thing that I had learned too. But as I learned things, I kept sharing them with people. My introduction to the LED coincided with also meeting Jim Burke, who's the founder of the Power Racing series. The Power Racing series started when they pulled a pink Barbie Jeep out of a dumpster behind Pumping Station 1 in Chicago in 2009. And because it was a hackerspace, they had the ability and desire to make it run, so they did. They took turns driving it and said, wouldn't it be great if we had a bunch of these? And now there's an entire race series built, and it's in its 8th season. And last year, in New York, 2 of those cars were autonomous. There will be a lot more of them to come because they were invited to the Autonomous Vehicle Challenge. That's really exciting for something that started out of a dumpster. And because I was involved with the power racing series, I was able to work with Chris Connors, who taught me how to light an LED, to get his tech arts department for Martha's Vineyard Regional High School, that's a mouthful, to be able to help them with their cobbled together out of basically trash electric car that they made as a school project. They brought it to Maker Faire, New York, and through some assistance from the other racers, the other teammates who were from different hacker spaces, they gave them some thicker wire and helped them with some of their troubleshooting issues that they had. By Sunday of that Maker Faire weekend, those kids were able to drive their finished car a complete lap around the track, each one. They weren't part of the race, but it was a really great experience for them to be able to be a part of that. And one of those students, the one that's on the left, actually was just accepted into an engineering program at Olin College as a result of that project, or in part. So my electric vehicle interest spanned into other interesting electric vehicles as well. You probably recognize this bit of pieces that are in my car. It's the Dalek Clara from Doctor Who, and Shaylee Bell built it. And if you notice, if you can see it, at the very sort of bottom front, it's beautifully made, but it's made out of foam core, so it's very delicate, and every time it bumps into anything, it warps. So while it was stored in my art studio for Georgetown Carnival, I said, why don't you rebuild it in wood? We have woodworkers here in the building who could help you with their tools and materials. We have scraps everywhere. And she said, you know, that's a great idea. So collaboration, which is a really great thing, if you don't have the skills or knowledge and someone else does, to be able to work with them. John Kirchenbaum at Equinox Studios invited her in to be able to start working on that project. Gave her all of the materials that she needed. And now, today, that Dalek is completely built out of wood except for one little section that she's still working on, figuring out how to pull off. But she takes it on the train in Seattle to some of the science fiction conventions. It's not uncommon to get on the light rail and have the Dalek be right there. So if you're ever in Seattle and that happens, that would be why. And then my boyfriend, who's not techie at all, a little bit less techie than me because I'm not so much myself, showed up at the art studio with a way to play music, tango music. And it was just this cute little white speaker that is Philips. They have an open source ability. If you want to know their code, you can write in and they'll send it to you. But because it looks like the center of a little flower, I had a new idea. What if we combined our skills and made a way to amplify that music so that we could play it in a really beautiful way? So I took a piece of trash, which was that hat box with all of the weird, colorful flowers. We created a pattern. We made it out of leather. We inserted the little speaker, and it works beautifully. I painted it up. I was going to bring it today, but I didn't think there'd be actually the way to play it, and it turns out there's a great table right here. But just pretend that right now you can hear this wonderful tango music that was inspired by my visit here in Bellingham to Spark Museum of Electrical Invention. And last year, one of my colleagues at Brown Paper Ticket, Sabrina Roach, who does all of our radio day things, she's our new media doer, needed some kind of a prop for National Radio Day. So some friends and I got together and thought, what could we do? What could we make out of just trash that would be really cool? So the white and brown supports are those sort of protectors on pallets that keep the corners from getting scrunched. And the big circle on the top is a lampshade from a broken lamp with a whole bunch of wine cups from our art walk, combined with some components that I borrowed from a friend of mine who does LED installations. And it lit up for National Radio Day, and it was amazing. I don't have a picture of it lit right now. But it got me to thinking, one of the people that I met through my course of exploring reusable materials last year started a group in Seattle called the Seattle Reuse Network. It was a group that I was intending to start and call it something slightly different, except I was in New York at the time. So the person that I had been talking with on Earth Day last year saying, I would really like to pull together all of the people who are doing reuse. She emailed me and said, hey, somebody's already doing that. I just want to put you in touch. So Claire came to this event, and Nime, who I borrowed the electronic components from, was there too. We said, wouldn't it be great to have like a hackathon that combines art and tech, but also trash? Trash being anything that's no longer being used for whatever it was intended for in the first place. So it's not necessarily the stuff that you would try to figure out which bin to put it in out in the hallway, but just anything that's laying around taking up space that you're not using anymore. So this began me thinking, I had this new great idea. And I started thinking about all of the creative reuse projects I'd seen over the couple of years at my exposure at Maker Faire. Mark Perez and his life-size mousetrap stands out in my mind. And the Gonkirin fire-breathing dragon that was made out of things that fell off of other things in Detroit and was all cobbled together into an amazing art car. And I thought, what if we invite all of the people together who are interested in art and tech and trash, or maybe just one of those three, have them get together and just do things with their hands, just experiment, talk to each other. What kind of organic things will emerge from that? Whatever those things will be, they'll be very exciting. So you're probably wondering what any of this has to do with open source. So I'd like to take a little bit of time to explain that, and then I would like to open it up as a dialogue, because it's a community building event, right? And if I'm just standing here yapping at you about what I've done, that's not very community oriented. The way I see it pertaining to open source is, as you've seen through my story, I used to be very stubborn in doing everything by hand. Adapting to change takes a really long time. It's a process. Just because the equipment exists doesn't mean people are going to take that step into that maker space to figure out how to do those things if they don't already know. There are barriers that exist, but there's only one place that they exist, and it's right inside our own heads. So if we can find ways to encourage people to take that step, whether it's through a class or a workshop or an open house or a project, or another group similar to the Art+Tech+Trash Meetup that we've created in Seattle, if you already know how to do something, if you can share that information in a really inviting, welcoming way, you'll end up learning something too from the people that come. And it's impossible to predict what that thing might be, but it will happen. I also have noticed that technology is rapidly outpacing education in a way that to me is very scary. A couple of years ago, I attended the Washington State Technology Educators Conference because the theme was learning by doing. And what I found is a lot of the teachers are so bogged down with what they have to teach in order to make state requirements that they don't have time to learn about the new things that are popping up every 3 minutes nowadays with, the Internet of Things and Thingiverse and all of the other ways that people are now making technology. They can't keep up. It's not even possible for them. So they're still teaching old ways of doing things just out of almost habit at this point, and exhaustion, and not being able to find a way to get to the other side of that. And the other thing that really stands out to me is that people who grew up like me in my age group before the internet are far more resistant to trying to figure out these new ways of doing things. Not the people particularly in this room, but definitely the people like my brothers in Illinois. They don't even want to know. But the problem is they're impacted by these changes, and because they're starting to accelerate, it's going to not take much time before people my age group and above are just left behind. Just not even know how. There used to be the joke of not being able to program your VCR. Pretty soon you're not even going to be able to drive your car. I mean, who knows what dramatic changes will happen, but people who are resistant to learning anything about what's already happening now, 5 years from now, I can't even imagine. So if you know people like that who are stubborn and don't want to know anything, if you could find interesting, small, little, easy ways to encourage them to try, you'll be doing them a huge service in the end. And probably yourself as well, if they're in the car ahead of you. So, and these are all things that I think that open source can help with. I think open source already has been helping with. It's just not as, the spotlight hasn't been pointed at it so much. Almost every app these days has some kind of open source component. I don't think I could figure out when my bus is coming without that, and that's really helpful to me. But open source software has come a really long way in the last few years. But what's more exciting to me is open source hardware, because software for the people that know how to use it is great, but if you're someone like me, I don't even know how to get to the part of the computer where you would code, and even once I got there, I wouldn't know what to do there. And I myself will start to make those changes soon. I just bought How to Program for Kids, and I realized that probably at Kids is even above my level, so I think I'm gonna start with Robot Turtles, the board game, and that might be a better fit for me. But where I was going with that is open source hardware. There's a product coming out soon that probably isn't open source, but it's definitely exciting hardware called the Glowforge. It's a desktop laser cutter. It's going to change a lot of things really fast for a lot of people. But it seems like every time there's a closed source something, there's also an open source version of it that comes out as well. So within the next 5 years, I think they're going to start to be almost everywhere. But the thing that I'm super excited about, and what actually this talk is more about than any of that, is what opensource.com refers to as the open source attitude. It's the sharing and the collaborating and the getting together and exchanging ideas, like what happens if you've ever been to a maker faire or any kind of event where someone, instead of just showing you what they did, explains to you how they did it and what kinds of trouble they had along the way and what they did to be able to solve it. Or maybe they still haven't solved it. Maybe you're the one that has the answer for them to be able to solve it. I think the more we talk to each other, the more we can begin to learn and grow. And for a really long time, everything was so closed. Even as a leatherworker, those used to be guild protected. You couldn't just make a leather mask unless you lived way out in the meadow somewhere where they didn't know what you were doing. Nowadays, leatherworking, it's really difficult to find someone to teach you. I taught myself. Most of us leatherworkers did, because there just isn't a place to go for that. The internet is beginning to be really good. YouTube is a great source. If there's something that you want to do or already know how to do, if you can share that with other people and just have that be a part of your way of life, it's going to go a really long ways to making the world that we all live in a lot better. And the other things I wanted to talk about, in the course of making things, we are also making more trash. Landfills are already at capacity. If we can start thinking of the materials that are laying around, in particular plastics, since it's not going to go away on its own probably ever, as you begin to build and think and do more things, if you can kind of keep in mind the things that are problematic, that would make life better not just for us, but for the other creatures on this planet, and put a little bit of energy into that, who knows how much more rapidly things will change. I think citizen science is really starting to bridge the gap of research in meaningful, powerful ways, and sharing that information so that other people can chime in too. And lifelong learning, I was in the Army in 1989. In 1989 is when Desert Shield started. It was the precursor to Desert Storm. We'd been training for Vietnam. We didn't even have the right color clothes. I think that a similar thing is going to happen with the technology gap that's occurring. All of a sudden, people aren't going to be prepared, and they're not going to know how to think about how to get prepared because they're not taught that way. It takes a really long time to completely turn on a dime and adapt. I don't think anyone really can do that. It's always a process. So the more a person now, even if they're young, even if they're not young, can start to think about ways to educate themselves about the things that they're interested in, it begins to change the way the mind works. Instead of relying on information from other people, if you have a smartphone, you already have all of that information from the world, and you can sift through and find what works for you, or you can add. You can be the one to share information that works for you, and then other people can say, I tried that and it worked terribly. As a leather worker, I used to always bake my masks in the oven. A friend of mine that I've never met in person but met through leatherworker.net, a really interactive forum, said, how can you stand the heat of the blow dryer on your face while you're shaping a mask? And I said, what are you talking about? And I said, I put it in the oven. And he said, what are you talking about? So we were able to share the technique that made life better for both of us. Now he bakes his masks in the oven. I was able to get a studio outside my home because now I had a way to shape a mask without having to have 220 electricity. That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had that conversation and openly shared that information. that's only just one isolated example, but what does happen is when two people that think in a different way end up in the same space and share, something organic, something magical, something better comes out of that. And if you can just think that to yourself when you're having a conversation with someone you seem to have nothing in common with, and reflect on it a couple weeks later, I think you'll see that you've changed a bit too through the course of it. And at this point, I would like to stop talking at you and give you the opportunity to talk to us about things that you might know of that maybe I haven't mentioned or even known about yet that might help. Does anybody? Yes?
I've tried a website called edx.com. Basically, some of the schools like Berkeley, Harvard, Georgetown University created a site for people that's free education in specific classes. Right now I'm taking one in Neuroscience 1. Because of that, it's absolutely free. They have the book and the lectures online. It's an amazing resource. They have multiple different classes for it.
What is it called?
edx.com.
Oh, okay. So ed, like the ED. Okay.
ED, capital X.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Also, what's fun is Tesla recently, in the last couple of years, open sourced a lot of their patents. So that would be very, very useful for someone who wants to build or make electrical components, not just cars, but using their motors, their battery technology, their logic circuits, all that kind of stuff. So there's a very large market for people open sourcing to be able to collaborate and get back from the community.
Great.
That's a huge example.
Thank you. Yes?
So you have some open source farming that's going on. It's awesome. You just know how to build all the equipment you need. Just out of parts you can buy it. And it's built in a different way that, it's like easier to fix and just upgrade as you go. It's not like, all closed up and, like hard to get to. So it's kind of simple stuff.
Great. Yeah. So there are a lot of you in this room at a tech conference to hear someone who is admittedly not a tech. I'm curious to know what drew you here, and I'm also curious to know that if I've satisfied any of your curiosity. Yes?
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm actually sort of involved with tech, but I also enjoy doing art as well. So, I was just sort of drawn to this because I'm in both.
Cool. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share or say? Yes.
Well, so I'm a software engineer, and over the past several years I've been getting more into Linux and the whole open source ethos. And as I talk to my wife, who's an artist, she kind of gets it, but I don't know if she fully does. And there's lots of other people that just really don't get it. So that was why I came here, is I really wanted to hear someone who sees the world very differently and thinks very differently. Okay, my wife's an artist also, so I've run into the we think differently thing. So I was curious, the people who think differently, what draws them to the open source ethos?
Well, I can actually answer. I'm a biology student. And if you think about 2003 when they started sequencing the human genome, that was not possible without technology. My husband is CS, but I come here because, one, there's art. I love the critta and stuff like that. I usually try to come for that. But I also love learning new things about the technology that I use. I learned about a source that I can use for databasing, which is called R, specifically designed by scientists as a research and graphing database. It's amazing what I'm learning here just from that perspective, an entirely different perspective, but we use technology all the time. Everyone does.
Yes.
One of the things that I have found is that once you start broadening your mind and realizing there's something other than the beaten path that everybody else has followed, you start realizing, hey, there's something new over here. And that opens your mind to realizing that, wow, there's something new here and here and here. Because I've had my mind completely blown apart many times by new things in different areas as time goes on. Because I used to be very much so straight and narrow, and if it wasn't proved by the modern day science, it was like, oh, that's not true. And then a couple of things happened, and lo and behold, it got totally unproven. And that has made me realize that, hey, maybe I need to be looking at everything I think and do and broaden my horizons. And now I'm an advocate for many things that modern mainstream is like, no, that's not how it goes. And it's like, oh, yes, it is. Open up and realizing that we need to go back to these ways, but yet also harness the technology as it comes online. Because Brian, in his talk yesterday about Linux is weird, he brought up and showed a picture of the De Laval milking station for the cows and how technology can really help the farmers manage their livestock that much better. Because I'm a farmer by trade at this point. And so a lot of what I do is very hands-on, very basic, but also I can't do what I do without technology, because one of the things we do is we rent out goats for vegetation management. Well, a very key part of that is a solar-powered battery backup energizer that runs the electric fencing that I use.
Oh.
So, and I also constantly use the computer and keep track of livestock and things like that way. So you gotta be open to everything.
Hmm. Thank you. Anybody else? Do you have something to share? Oh, I thought. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yes.
Basic question. Have you witnessed the instance where commercialization limits features or products that the open source community, provided a segue to compete with commercialization? Like, Linux in itself is that, but apart from that, do you have key examples?
So I would say that in my capacity as more of just a facilitator and not a tech person, I often don't really even know when it comes to software what is and is not open without doing a little quick Google search to say, is it open? And so the things that I do know that are open still are things such as microcontrollers, the Raspberry Pi, for instance, Arduino still is. So I don't really know the answer to your question, but I'm glad that you asked it, because another thing about trying to put together this presentation is I realized how very little I actually do know, which is the main reason that I wanted to hear from all of you, so that I can educate myself more too, and so that all of us in this room that might not have already heard the things that you have to say can say, oh, I want to know more about that, and then also look it up or think about it. So I think that just having the different kinds of questions, whether any of us know the answers. Does anyone else in the room know the answer to this question?
Cloud computing is a great example. Like the cloud would not exist without open source. Even closed source companies would run on Linux and open source products.
That's it. Yeah. Do you notice like big patterns in terms of the effect on culture by having open source, instead of just a closed source commercial thing? Excellent. Yeah, they're big picture patterns you're seeing. Excellent, just in terms of changes of culture.
What I've seen primarily is based on my experiences at Maker Faire across the country. For 2 years, or 5 years actually, I was a maker, a presenter, and I was helping out with the Power Racing series of their goal to build a high school program. I think what they're going to do now is just hold off and try to go straight to autonomous for high school students as just a, depending on what the school wants, whether it's an elective or whether it's an after-school program or whatever. Each school will have different ideas about how that works for them. But what I've seen is 5-year-olds learn how to solder every single day around the world. Did you know that? 5-year-olds everywhere at Maker Fairs. It's a really big thing. And for a 5-year-old to already know how to solder when they're 10, what is it that they're going to be making at that point? I don't even really know how to solder, but half of it was that I needed new glasses so I could see. But because little children that go to Maker Faire with their parents that are already interested in these changes are growing up with these changes as a part of their life, as compared to the students, the kids where I'm from, who they don't have access to that. Their parents wouldn't want them to have anything to do with it anyway because it's so foreign to them. In Illinois, if you can't see past the cornfield, it doesn't matter what's on the other side. That's just kind of always been the Midwest mindset. You work hard, but you don't worry about the rest of it. It takes care of itself. Or it doesn't even matter. But it does, that's the problem. And they're isolating themselves behind their cornfield walls. And there are a lot of them, and they're all part of this country that we live in. And it's really scary to me to think of what that's going to look like 20 years from now. In 1987, 88, I was exposed to, I guess it was probably 89. I was, remember when the computer screen was black and it had green letters? I had someone, one of our executive officers in the Army, wanted to teach me how to use the computer. And I said, no, I'm not interested in that. The reality is I failed typing class, not because I couldn't type, but because I'm dyslexic. And when I would start typing words, I would automatically switch the letters around and have typing errors. And you can't get a good grade in typing no matter how fast you type if there are errors. So I didn't want anything to do with the computer. This was the worst thing I've ever done to myself. I didn't realize what an impact that would have on the rest of my life. If I would have just explained that to him and then sat down and let him teach me, who knows? Maybe I would be on the other side of this table right now. Maybe I would be on the software side of it. I have probably more of an engineering personality type, but I can't do the math and science because I can't put the little characters in the right place for it to make any sort of sense. I would probably be the person who blew up their company by typing code wrong, I don't know. But anyway, it's much better that I'm over here trying to get everyone who knows how to do those things working together to do them. That's more my skill set and my comfort level.
Well, one of the things that I really like that you just kind of pointed out is just the whole maker faire part of things, because that having a place where all those minds come together to sort of show people what the possibilities are, that's when people start making the connection and realizing, oh, okay, now I'm interested enough to go ahead and dive into those YouTube videos or to whatever, to start going down that pathway. But it's really kind of our job to make sure that people know what those possibilities are so that they can have those amazing ideas. So I really like the fact that you're saying share, and I think that's great.
Thank you. And as we continue to learn all of these new technology things, I still think it's really important to think about what happens to the waste, to the byproduct of anything new, or just the thing that's now old or obsolete. We probably don't want to create a whole new pile of things that we're throwing away. So always sort of just ahead of time thinking like, I'm going to make this, which is going to make this not worthwhile anymore. What am I going to do with this so that it doesn't just end up in the trash? And if we just sort of start thinking about everything that we encounter in our lives that way, our children and our partners and our friends will maybe start to emulate some of that along the way. What I'm hoping to do is be able to build some kind of a, not sure what it will look like yet, maybe it will be a web page, maybe it will be a social media group, but something that combines elements of art, tech, and trash that puts whatever is in your city as far as an arts organization, a creative reuse center, and a maker space, all in one spot. Because I feel like in Bellingham, they're very well connected. I went to an event last year called the Recycled Arts and Resource Expo. It was presented by Allied Arts in sort of partnership with the Rag Finery, where I got this jacket yesterday. It's made out of 3 garments that would have been potentially landfill, and it was reconstructed to be something really amazing. The buttons, I apologize, are not OCD compliant. They will not stay in any sort of organized place. But it's a brand new garment that I love and adore that's made out of 3 things that might have been trash. So places like that, and the Foundry, the Bellingham Makerspace, the 3 of them worked so well together that I went to one space who said, oh, have you met the people at these other places? But in some cases, those were the places I had just come from. So if we could get every neighborhood, every city that connected, so that all of the different kinds of ways of thinking and doing and using materials can begin to sort of just be part of our everyday lives, I think that accidentally we'll begin to start making really amazing changes without even really trying to, just by doing that. So, yes?
You touched a little bit about continuing education.
Yes.
And so for me as a software engineer, there's a lot of resources for learning new programming language and all kinds of stuff like that online. That's very accessible online. I'm curious for you, coming out with more of an art side, what's been the most effective tools or methods to do that continuing education with like non-software engineering things?
Yeah, so I would call it more lifelong learning than continuing education, because that's usually more formal and has some kind of a certificate or something associated and a cost. But what I have a tendency to do is get involved in just hands-on project-based things, whether it's just taking a big pile of junk and making it into something else, or if it's to teach someone how to make a specific thing out of piles of junk. And I use piles of junk because there's not a cost really associated with that, other than maybe hauling it around and storing it and such. But if people can begin to think about materials as raw materials that you would otherwise just put in the recycle bin and never think about again, there are a lot of ways that you can still learn even as an adult just from combining elements, because even if it's paper towel rolls and like pipe cleaners or something, it's amazing how just the concept of trying to figure out what else that could be leads to more ideas. I have this steel, basically it's a loft thing. It's like a metal framework in my studio that has a top so that I can put things on top of it. It has a curtain rod so that it could be a fitting room, or it can be a storage closet, or it could be whatever it needs to be on that particular day. But I took drinking straws and a hot glue gun, and I glued it all together so that it looked like the thing I wanted it to be. I took it downstairs to one of the welders and said, "Can you make this thing for me about 8 feet tall and about 4 feet wide?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Can you make it for me by next Friday?" And she said, "Maybe." And now I have this structure that's freestanding. I was able to take out little chunks of the baseboard so that it fits tight against the wall, and it's perfect. It solves a lot of problems, but by gluing those drinking straws together to make that structure, I had a bunch of other ideas about things that I could build, and I can use these otherwise garbage materials, straws I don't even think can be recycled right now, to make other modular component ideas. And it's really great because I can't draw, and even though I have Inkscape now, I don't like looking at things on a flat surface because I have a three-dimensional mind. So if I can just cobble things together so that they look sort of like a little version of what I want them to be, it's much easier for the person building it for me to say, "Oh, but it's not going to fit because this beam right here is going to be too wide for your door," or whatever. So even as adults, trash still has incredible value. And if you're trying to make an art piece, sometimes the random discarded thing is absolutely what you need to be able to make something really unique and incredible. So if you just start looking at the things around you in a different way, like this is can't think of an example right now, but whatever this thing is that we're imagining, and you can all imagine whatever that is in your own mind, it can be whatever, but what else could it be besides that? And if you can think of at least one other thing that you could do with it, if you needed to, I think for me, creativity requires the need. I have to have a need for something to exist, and then I have to have no time, and I'm super impatient, so that's never a problem. And I have to have no money to just go buy it somewhere, and I am always broke, so that's also not a problem. So all I need is the need. Once the need for a thing to exist occurs, then it happens, because I'm able to put all of my energy into figuring out how to manifest that. And because I'm really impatient, whatever's in the room with me, if I'm in my own place, ends up becoming, if it's even possible by any stretch, part of the thing that I'm making. And I sometimes surprise myself with the things I come up with and would have not thought of had I not had that need for a thing. But if we can take that kind of energy of a need for a thing and apply it to the problems that we're aware of, and then pull together resources of other people's ideas and skills and knowledge of how to do those things, I think that using what opensource.com refers to as the attitude, the open source attitude of just value sharing, I think that we can make a world that we all want to be a part of and feel good about being engaged with. Maybe watch just a little bit less Netflix.
One of the things that I just want to speak to is, and Tamara makes a really good point that, YouTube, and there's a lot of online, there's a lot of resources that are out there, and it's easy to go ahead and just pull it up on your computer and sit at home and kind of go down a pathway. But coming to things like this, or finding a hackerspace or a makerspace in your area, and then going and actually hang out there and do some of your work there, because then you'll see what some of the other people are doing, you might actually end up going in a slightly different direction or using one of their resources then that gets you to where your goal is faster that you wouldn't have had just because, I mean, it's easy to go ahead and go down that path when you're on your own. But I mean, it goes to the whole open source, not just on the computer, but the whole open source in human taking it.
Yeah, and an interesting thing that happened once I was finally brave enough to go to a makerspace and use the equipment, because it took a while not knowing how to do that. It's a scary thing. And it doesn't need to be scary, and it shouldn't be scary. But, so if you just tell yourself, if Tamara could do it, I could totally do this, I've got this, right? But I was laser cutting leather, and another person at the makerspace at the time was laser cutting acrylic. And then Seattle Mini Maker Faire was coming up, and I wanted to make the awards because we gave out 6 awards that year for different things, different categories like Best of Show or whatever. And I wanted to make them out of acrylic, and I wanted to have an LED underneath so that it would light up and illuminate the part that was etched, and it was going to be really cool. In my mind, it was amazing. In reality, it was kind of awful, but and I ended up doing it in wood, and it was just fine. It just didn't light up. But because I had been laser cutting leather, there was a pile of scraps, and the guy who was laser cutting acrylic was watching me with the leather, and he was saying, "Oh, that's really cool. I have some ideas." And I said, "Here, have these scraps and start playing with them." The next time I went to cut acrylic, he was cutting leather and making little gifts for her daughter and all of her friends for a birthday party. They were little bracelets with their names on them, and it was really sweet. But that wouldn't have happened, probably, had the two of us not been there at the same time seeing what each other was doing. So it definitely, like I was saying, you can't predict the organic ways that it will begin to shift and change, but it happens. I've seen it happen so many hundreds of times now through Maker Faire. And I keep talking about Maker Faire, and I don't mean for this to be about that. I just mean for it to be about, that's the primary example of where I see it happen because it's all sort of concentrated. But you can have any kind of after-school group or even just get together with some friends and Skillshare, drink a glass of wine or some tea and just make things together. And even if you're crocheting and your friend is, I don't know, wood burning or something. Wood burning smells bad, but it's better than leather. But, you know, just get together and do things. Just have a crafting party, and you can even call it crafting, because the beautiful thing about crafting, and the even more beautiful thing about crafting with things that are otherwise trash, it doesn't matter if you wreck it. It was getting it thrown away anyway, right? So now this amazing cool thing that you just made out of what would have been trash is now on your bookshelf, and you're super proud of it, and it's a prototype for who knows what else. Might even be something that you go into business with and sell to other people. So, does anybody else have anything they want to share while we still have a few minutes?
There are other, you're talking about edX.
Mm-hmm.
There are other ones that do the same thing. They're called MOOCs, which is Massive Open Online Courses, I believe. But there are plenty of other ones that are free. I know I can't remember the name of the second one that we've used. But I'm sure you could Google it and find out. But
do they get certifications too? Because after you
yeah, some of them
edX, they'll send you a certification.
Yeah, they do.
edX, you can audit the course, or you can pay and get certification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there are, as I said, there are multiple ones out there.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them I know I've been trying to do an accounting course where I could go and actually become an accountant with an additional certification. It lines me up for an additional certification that is not available through the MOOC, but through the accounting group.
I've done 2 Linux classes, an HTML class. I'm currently working on a Spanish class, all through edX.
Nice.
Cool. Very good.
I can only do it about an hour a week, but I still need that.
That's good. That's still an hour of forward progress. Anybody else? I just wanted to say, have any of you read Cryptonomicon? So I have not read it yet, and I was warned that it's very intellectual, and so I said, that's good, I like intellectual, I just don't like academic, and he said, it's pretty academic. They said by the third page, you're going to have looked up so many things that you're not going to even know like what you're reading. And I said, so you're saying I can buy one book and learn 100 things by the third page? I'm absolutely going to read that. So I just want to share one last thought. Never stop learning, never stop sharing, and the more hands-on project-based you can make that for the people that you're teaching anything to, whether it's your niece or your nephew or your neighbor or even yourself, the more you're going to retain it. Let yourself fail, let yourself explore, let yourself try. Mrs. Sullivan, my English teacher who had the rigid white bun and was very glary, she's not here in this room anymore. And even if she was, I think she would actually appreciate the fact that things have changed, that we have the freedom to teach ourselves whatever we want to know, and that because we have access to do that, we should make a little time for that. We deserve it. Our brains deserve it. Thank you.